Hello, and welcome to Ubi Petrus. We are pleased to be hosting a debate between Ubi Petrus and John Collorafi that will get underway very shortly. The topic of today's debate is the role of the papacy in the first millennium. We will begin the debate with a timed 15-minute opening intro in which both Ubi and John will introduce themselves and then lay out their opening remarks. I will be giving them a 1-minute warning before their initial 15 minutes is up. After that, we will proceed to an agreed-upon freestyle and open debate format. As we approach the end of today's debate, each person will then be given a 5 to 10-minute closing statement. And since John is our guest here today, John said that he would like to go ahead and go first with his opening remarks and with his introduction. So, John, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself for us, that would be great.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here with you. I'm happy to be with you here, whether you're a seeker of truth, whether you're a Protestant who has overcome the error of sola scriptura and you're not sure how to proceed. Maybe you have it narrowed down to Catholic or Orthodox, or even if you're just an intelligent critic. I'm very happy to be here. I am a translator, and I've spent the greater part of my life studying the works of the fathers of the church in Latin and to some extent in Greek as well. And I have at least some Greek blood from my grandfather Kalligeros, but I will tell you simply I was raised as a traditional Catholic, and I'm somewhat more familiar with the traditional Catholic Latin form of the Mass. So if we're here to talk about the role of the Roman Pontiff in the Church, we must answer the question, who is Simon Bar-Jonah? And Christ our Savior has done that in the Gospel. The Gospel of John, he says, "Thou shalt be called Cephas," which is interpreted, that is rendered into the Greek language as Peter or Petros. And the simplest explanation should be considered the true one, which is that Christ is giving Peter a proper name after the Aramaic Kepha, or rock. And Christ knew that this would later be rendered into Greek as Petros, from the Greek Petra, which means rock, and Latin also has the same term. Now, those are feminine nouns, or those are at least usually feminine endings in both Latin and Greek. So Christ gives Peter the masculine name Petros, simply changing a feminine or usually feminine ending to a masculine termination. But I was trying to explain this, the issues that would arise if St. Peter had been given a feminine name. I thought of that old Johnny Cash song, "A Boy Named Sue." And obviously we don't have to worry about those issues of St. Peter being given a masculine name. Now, in that Locus Classicus, the passage of Matthew 16 to 18, and what follows, Christ says, "Therefore, thou art a rock, and upon this rock I will build my church." And then he adds, "I will give to thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever thou shalt loose shall be loosed in heaven," and so on. While later on in Matthew 18, Christ gives the power of binding and loosing with the apostles in common, it does not derogate from the fact that he gave the power of binding and loosing to Peter alone, as well as the keys. So we must determine what is meant by the keys, since these are not promised to the other apostles in Matthew 18. So some of you may know that Leo XIII wrote the encyclical Satis Cognitum, where he says that the keys represent governing power. That is true. They're not always used in connection with jurisdiction, but in many cases they are. We find, for example, that St. Theodore the Studite approved of this interpretation. He actually says here, he has not too well-known work called the Catecheses, or Catechesis 15 in Cardinal Mai's Nova Patrium Bibliotheca. He actually says, I have learned that at Rome they carry with honor the keys of the Coryphaeus, the Apostles, Peter. The Lord indeed did not give him material keys, but spiritual ones for binding and loosing. They have made them out of silver and display them for veneration. Such is their faith. There, that is at Rome, has the immovable rock of faith been placed as the foundation according to the word of the Lord. And we find references to this power of the keys in both Latin fathers and Eastern fathers. And I'm talking specifically in connection with Rome. So we find references to this power among, as I say, both Latin fathers and Eastern fathers in Orthodox liturgy, and even among heretics. By virtue of these privileges, St. Peter is commonly called among the fathers by various titles, a very common one in Latin being Prince of the Apostles. The most common one I have found in the Greek fathers is Coryphaeus, which according to the lexicon means chief, leader, foremost man. And that's not all. We also, at times, find him being compared to Moses. So, for example, let's take, for example, from St. John Damascene on the Transfiguration. His homily on the Transfiguration, he calls Moses a divine lawgiver, Peter the chiefest disciple of the New Testament. I did look that up in the Greek. Usually that's koryphiotatos. And again, Christ says, or St. Damascene, talking about Peter's dignity, says, secretly, that is Jesus, instructs him whom he had predestined to be the worthy president of the church, proedron. And again, he, that is Christ, ordained thee the key bearer of the kingdom of heaven and gave thee the power of binding and loosing sins. PG 553 and 555. We find the same thing in St. Macarius of Egypt, when a homily says that Moses was succeeded by Peter, who had committed to his hands the new church of Christ and the true priesthood. Homily 26, PG 34, 690. And St. Augustine, among the Latin fathers, has the same comparison. So he says, why is it illogical if Peter, that is after wishing to use the sword, became pastor of the church, as Moses, after killing the Egyptian, became ruler of that synagogue that is in the Old Testament? Contra Faustum, book 2270, PL 42, 445. So we see a clear comparison made by multiple fathers between Peter and Moses. And although Peter is the first bishop of Antioch by tradition, and we do talk about the chair of Peter at Antioch, it is not at Antioch, but at Rome, where he lays down the definitive, or passes on definitively, the fullness of his apostolic authority to his first successors, who, according to tradition, were Saints Linus, Cletus, and Clement. And so we find, for example, in St. Jerome, in St. Jerome in the De Viris Illustribus, he talks about how St. Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, went to Rome, and he was bishop there for 25 years, according to tradition. Same in Eusebius, same thing in the homilies of St. Leo. So, as I said, the liturgical tradition, as well as the tradition of the fathers of East and West, talks about this primacy of St. Peter at Rome. And just among a few texts that I could give here. Time won't permit to give me everything, but we'll talk about, let's say, for example, the Leonine Sacramentary, for example. That's an Orthodox liturgy. It's not an official liturgy. It's from the patristic age, about the 6th century, give or take. So in one of the prefaces for this feast, where so after the opening, standard opening, Vere Dunium et Justum, it is truly fitting and just, it gives thanks to God, who to make this see the ruler or regimen of the entire church, and to show that what it preached was to be kept everywhere, placed in her the prince of the apostolic dignity, and at the same time teacher of the nations. That's PL 55, 56. We find similar language in the Sacramentary of Bobbio, as well as in the Mozarabic liturgy. Because of time constraints, I won't give all the quotations, but I do want to talk about those Eastern fathers who make reference to the power of the keys at Rome. And so we have, for example, St. Maximus, who says that according to the very promises of the Lord, the gates of hell have never prevailed over her, that is the Roman Church, but rather she has the keys of the Orthodox faith and confession. PG 91, 137. St. Theodore the Studite wrote to one of the popes, "A synod has been held for the condemnation of the gospel, the keys of which you have received." PG 99, 1021. Elsewhere, writing to Pope St. Paschal, he calls Rome the chief throne in which Christ placed the keys of faith. PG 99, 1281. Now, we find the keys at times are invoked in the most solemn jurisdictional acts, notably at the Council of Ephesus, where the legate Philip, a priest, talks about how it is known to all ages and doubtful to none that St. Peter received the keys of the kingdom, and that he lives and judges and his successors, and so on and so forth. And he invokes the power of the keys before the anathematization of the heretic Nestorius. Now, we sometimes find the argument by Roman Catholics that the other bishops there kept a respectful silence. It's actually quite a bit better than that. St. Cyril was present. He was holding the place of Pope Celestine, according to the Acts of the Council. And the papal legates had been ordered to take counsel directly with St. Cyril himself in the letters of Pope Celestine. So they were acting basically together in concert. It's quite a bit more than simply a respectful silence. We also find the power of the keys invoked by ancient popes such as Boniface I and Celestine I in connection with governing the church in East Illyricum, a province far, far to the east, which, if I'm not mistaken, even includes parts of modern Greece today. We also
you have
find,
a minute and a half. I was just saying you have a minute and a half left. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. We also find the power of the keys invoked most famously in the Lateran Council of 649, where St. Stephen of Dora approaches Pope Martin and asks for an intervention in the East, because, among other things, the keys were promised to Peter alone. And Pope Martin gives directions that a papal vicar can create entire Orthodox hierarchies and other patriarchs, if necessary. Okay. So it looks like I won't be able to have time to quote the heretical authorities. It's probably just as well. So I thank you for giving me this time, and I'll sit back respectfully and listen to what my interlocutor has to say.
Okay, and now that we've heard John's introduction and opening remarks, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ubi for his own introduction and opening remarks, and you have 15 minutes starting now.
Okay, it's a pleasure to have you on, John. Really an honor to have you on. So in the patristic period, there were a couple of titles applied to the Pope, such as Patriarch or Archbishop of the World or Ecumenical Archbishop. And it should be noted that ecumenical was the Byzantine word used to describe the inhabited world, particularly the civilized inhabited world. So the terms ecumenical archbishop and archbishop of the world are interchangeable as they're identical in Greek. But we see this title being used repeatedly for the Pope, most notably, for example, at the Ecumenical Council of Chalcedon held in 451. Pope St. Leo the Great is addressed as ecumenical archbishop 3 times in session 3. And Pope St. Sixtus is referred to as ecumenical archbishop by St. Cyril of Alexandria after the Council of Ephesus. The title is also used in the East for Pope St. Hormisdas and Pope St. Agapetus I at various times. Terms like archbishop, patriarch, and metropolitan were legal terms that carried a specific meaning, with specific prerogatives and duties clearly spelled out within the canons. So why were Eastern writers drawing parallels between the role of the Pope at the universal level and the role of the Archbishop or Patriarch at the local level, unless the prerogatives and duties were parallel? In other words, why mislabel the Pope? Now, some might say it was just flowery language, but it was not. It was not meant to be compliment. It actually meant something because, as mentioned, the term was a legal term. Well, considering the Pope as the Archbishop of the world, also known as the Ecumenical Archbishop, what was the role of an Archbishop? And the canons clearly show it. In fact, they clearly demonstrate that the role of the patriarchs, metropolitans, bishops, and auxiliary bishops are. We see it in the 34th and 35th canons of the Apostolic Canons, where it talks about how neither is the head to do something without the body, nor the body to do something without the head. We see it in the 13th and 22nd canons of the Synod of Antioch in 341, which are accepted at Trullo in 692. We see in Canon 15 of Sardica in 343, which was formally accepted in the East at Trullo in 692, but was put into practice immediately in the East. We see it in the 20th canon of Trullo. And once again, we see in the 17th and 21st canons of Constantinople 869, which, despite not being a council that the East holds to, it has been held to in the West since the Gregorian reforms, I believe. It does reflect how the role of archbishops was viewed at the time. So the list goes on, but in all of these we see the role of a universal primate as shown in the first set of canons mirrors that of the second set of canons. So further, it explains why these statements were so commonly applied onto the Pope in the first millennium, that there's currently a disagreement within the Orthodox world between Moscow and Constantinople on who can grant autocephaly does not affect the prerogatives of the primate outside of the issue of who can grant autocephaly. Regardless of what one thinks of the current ecumenical patriarch, historically, the ecumenical patriarch has had the role of second, and being that we consider the current seat of Rome to be empty, that means he's currently in the first position. Now, documents like the Ravenna document and the Chieti document, which were produced by the same commission, they were produced by the same commission and consist of the Pope's hand-picked scholars meeting and coming to a common understanding of the role of the Pope in the first millennium with the Orthodox Church's hand-picked scholars. The Chieti document's formal name is Towards a Common Understanding and Service to the Unity of the Church, and it's paragraphs 15 through 21 that they lay out the more precise terms, in more precise terms in Ravenna, what the role of a universal primate is. Now, these documents were not issued by either church's synods. They're simply an official document of joint Catholic Orthodox Church, or joint Catholic Orthodox dialogue. And the legates who did sign believing it to be representative or at least compatible with the official teaching of their communions. So their decisions were based on the canonical literature that we just explained. Now, we know that the Church of Rome, their prerogatives were explained in the canons the sixth canon of Nicaea, the third, fourth, fifth, and ninth canons of Sardica, the second and third canons of Constantinople I. We see it in the 9th, 17th, and 28th canons of Chalcedon. There's the 36th canon of Trullo, the 21st canon of Constantinople 869, which again, though it's not part of the Padalion, it is representative of how things were thought about at the time. All of these explain both the role of Rome and Constantinople. None of these say anything about infallibility or about universal ordinary jurisdiction or about the ability of a pope to overrule people. In fact, what they all appeal to is conciliarity. So I'm not seeing anything that would indicate Vatican I, which is ultimately what the Catholic Church has to prove. So aside from Rome being a place where people could lodge an appeal, and by the way, the appeals that were given, Rome acted as a review court. So you would put in your request for repeal, and Rome would decide whether or not you would get an appeal. And the canons of Sardica state that appeal then had to be held at a territory adjacent to the territory of the deposed cleric. At most, the Church of Rome could send clerics to join those bishops and judge with them, but at no point does it state that Rome could actually hear the appeal. What you do see is that Constantinople in Canon 7 and Canons 9 and 17 of Chalcedon is allowed to hear appeals. That's actually what the equal privileges that Canon 28 of Chalcedon talks about, is about hearing appeals. It was after that that Rome sort of took on an appeals role that was much the same. So you have Constantinople and Rome hearing appeals. You even see Constantinople hearing appeals from the west. St. Ambrose of Milan appeals to the Patriarch of Constantinople regarding Bishop of Nicomedia who had run away from Milan. As far as the power of the keys goes, up until the time of scholastics, the power of the keys typically meant the right to forgive sins. It had very little to do about governing. In fact, I think you have to give a pretty tortured reading of the sources to get it to say governing. And that's not just me saying that. That's the article entitled "The Power of the Keys" from the Catholic Encyclopedia, which was published in 1917. So it's not post-Vatican II mumbo jumbo. It's actually traditional Catholic stuff. And that's all I have to say about that, so I'll wrap up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ubi, for the intro and opening remarks there. At this point, we're going to go ahead and transition into what I guess can be described as a just freestyle, informal, open debate kind of format. So I don't know who would like to start off. If you, maybe John, if you'd like to maybe lead off with maybe some counterpoints to some of Ubi's opening remarks there, and then that we can just kind of open that up for, like I said, I know it's a debate, it's kind of a discussion too, but it's, it's obviously not formalized, so wherever you'd like to go with that, John.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would say the most important point I want to address is what Ubi Petrus said about the power of the keys. Okay, so I want to address this first explicitly. Okay, I don't know if you heard my opening statement, but in ancient times, in the 5th century, or let's say beginning at the late 4th century, the popes had a vicariate at Thessalonica, and the bishop is well known. The bishop of Thessalonica was a papal vicar. Nothing very important was to be done without his knowledge, and then he would report to Rome any of the more important things happening, what they're called causae maiores. But explicitly, I want to say here that the ancient popes did, in fact, invoke the power of the keys in governing in connection with the papal vicariate at Thessalonica, among other places. So, for example, let's take I believe it's Pope Boniface the First, or Saint Boniface the First, I should say. He writes to the bishops of East Illyricum, and he reminds them that the Apostolic See, that is Rome, has a vicar in the East. And he says, now, talking about St. Peter, who is represented by the vicar and the Pope, whoever arises in contumely against him cannot be an inhabitant of the kingdom of heaven. To thee, it says, I shall give the keys of the kingdom of heaven, where nobody shall enter without the favor of the key bearer. Thou art, he says, Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church. PL 2780. Saint Celestine the First as well has similar comments in the context of the vicariate at Thessalonica. We especially are bound to have care for all to whom Christ imposed the necessity of dealing with all in the holy apostle Peter, when he gave him the keys for opening and shutting. And the Latin there is in PL 5427. And then he gives specific powers of the vicar. No bishop was to be ordained without his council. Bishops shouldn't gather against the will of the vicar. Anything needed that had to be reported to Rome went through the Bishop of Thessalonica, and so on and so forth. Anybody who resisted this regime must be separated from the Episcopal College, according to Pope Celestine I. Ubi Petrus has called this power in East Illyricum patriarchal, and I have no doubt that there are plenty of scholars who'd be able to cite for that. In going through the papal letters and the primary sources, I found nothing so far which indicates this authority as being specifically patriarchal. I found nothing in popes using this term patriarchal. They never say this is your patriarch speaking. They don't do it. They just invoke the power of the keys or the authority of St. Peter as Prince of the Apostles. So I would be interested in hearing his response. So go ahead.
Okay. So first off, here's this Catholic Encyclopedia's article on the power of the keys. It states, it is comparatively seldom that the fathers, when speaking of the power of the keys, make any reference to the supremacy of St. Peter. When they deal with that question, they ordinarily appeal not to the gift of the keys, but to his office as the rock on which the church is founded. In their references to the potestas clarium, or power of the keys, they are usually intent on vindicating against the Montanist and Innovation heretics the power intent in the church to forgive. Now, you would think that if anyone was going to try and hunt down examples of the power of the keys, meaning papal supremacy, it would be the Catholic Encyclopedia from 1917. But it really doesn't. It doesn't do so. And it even goes on to explain that by the time of the scholastics, it meant the power to govern. Now, would you do me a quick favor? Could you reread the quotations from St. Celestine and from St. Boniface?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. St. Boniface. Whoever arises in contumely against him cannot be an inhabitant of the kingdom of heaven. To thee, he says, I shall give the keys of the kingdom of heaven, where nobody shall enter without the favor of the key bearer. Thou art, he says, Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church. The Latin is PL 2780.
Okay, so just thank you for reading that, by the way. So just responding to that one, I don't see how that really has anything to do with ruling so much as breaking the bond of charity at that point. So it would talk about forgiveness of sins in that sense, that those who had risen up against the Pope, they had caused some sort of schism amongst them. This would require forgiveness. And if you're familiar with the situation in Illyricum, it was originally a papal part of the Patriarchate of Rome, and the emperor just sort of handed it over to the Patriarch of Constantinople. And that was actually in the 800s, but earlier on, you have the whole situation involving, I believe it was the Bishop of Corinth, and how an appeal was made to Constantinople. And so St. Boniface sees these people going into schism against him, but they're sort of breaking the bond of charity. Well, that would require forgiveness of sins to heal. I mean, you can't just blow off what your metropolitan says. What about the quotation from Saint Celestine? Would you be able to read that one for me, please?
Sure. Okay. So Pope Saint Celestine says, "We especially are bound to have care for all, to whom Christ imposed the necessity of dealing with all in the holy Apostle Peter, when he gave him the keys for opening and shutting." The Latin is PL 5427. Then, after that passage, he lists some of the powers of the Vicar of Thessalonica.
Okay. So would you be able to list the powers that he offers for the Vicar of Thessalonica?
Sure. Without that bishop's council, no bishop should be ordained. This is according to Pope Celestine. Without the council of the Vicar of Thessalonica, no bishop should be ordained. Bishop should not gather against his will. Anything that should be reported to the Pope should go through the Bishop of Thessalonica. And he actually says, I don't have the exact words, but he says that let it be known that whoever believes that our authority or the vicar's command is to be resisted must be separated from the Episcopal College.
Okay. So the Latin there for authority is auctoritas, it's not potestas. And as you well know, auctoritas in Latin refers to the power of a tutor or a ward. Typically, it also referred to the power that the Senate had to ratify a consul, who then did have potestas. It referred to the ability to ratify something, to allow someone in. It did not refer to the ability to simply boss others around. That was potestas. So, in that case, even if it is using the power of the keys, and I would actually say, hearing that one, it does seem to be something about rulership of the church. It's indicating a certain conciliarity, the conciliar model, from the reading that I would have of it.
I would say in the ancient church there was more emphasis on synods, but the popes had no problem acting alone when they needed to. But generally speaking, we should also keep in mind that even when they invoke the power of the keys, when they act unilaterally, it's often in defense of one or the other of the canons, and the Pope will intervene somewhere and say, let the canons be observed. So I don't see those things being contradictory. I don't see I don't see a necessary contradiction between some kind of conciliarity in the power of the keys and the canons.
Can you cite specific examples where the Pope is working without his Roman Synod, just simply all on his own, and he cites the power of the keys in a way that is undeniably a matter of potestas?
Generally, well, I mean, in the letters to Illyricum are specifically papal letters. I mean, I don't recall if there was any synod that was held or needed to be held before the Pope wrote those letters. I mean, I consider that a case of him acting unilaterally. But I don't want to be absolute on that, because it was on very important matters. It was customary for the Pope to hold some.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last sentence. Could you say that again, please?
The last part says, I don't want to make it an absolute definite answer, because it was very common for the Pope to hold a synod before acting in a very important matter. For example, Lateran Synod and so on.
It sounded like you said it was very common for him to hold a synod?
Correct.
Oh, okay. So in other words, it would be the general rule that he held a synod before stating, because I know that typically when papal letters came out, it would make reference to there being a synod. A great example of that would be the letters of Pope St. Agatha to the Sixth Council. It states that they're from the Roman Synod. It was a synod of about 120 bishops. Similarly, for example, the excommunications of monothelites that came out of Roman synods under Pope St. Theodore, they're, synods of bishops that did them. So, I mean, I would have to see, and if you want time to look through, I mean, that'd be great, but it sounds like the onus is on you to prove that these are not synodal acts, considering that, as you just stated, typically speaking, when the popes acted, it was with a synod.
I don't consider that to be, I mean, to me, it's a kind of a technical point where you get the scholars out, you kind of rummage through the Tillmonts or the ones who do a real proctological examination of church history. Off the top of my head, I would have a problem, giving every single example that the Pope did or did not, call a synod. Generally, in matters of great moment, I think they would. So I don't consider this.
Well,
go ahead.
You don't have to provide every single example, just simply one or two examples where they acted clearly on their own without a synod. Because, I mean, that is what the First Vatican Council states that the Pope can do.
Well, it's normal. It was usual for the popes to call a synod, but they would take all sorts of other decisions unilaterally. For example, I will give an example. So at the Council of Chalcedon, when Pope Leo learns that there is what we call Canon 28, it was not called that at the time. But what he learns of the existence of what we now call Canon 28, he says we annul it by an all-embracing definition, in Latin, a general definition. And I see no example, no reference to having called a synod for that. He just does it by himself.
Okay, but that would fit into the bounds of auctoritas, where he refuses to ratify something. We need specific examples of potestas.
Well,
and that would still fit, and therefore that would still fit into the conciliar model. Because if one bishop's standing up and saying, even the head of a synod, saying, I annul this, that's still the conciliar model. The Patriarch of Constantinople or Patriarch of Alexandria or whomever, whichever head of a synod can stand up and say, no, I'm not letting this go through, and therefore annul the decision of a synod. Do you sort of see where I'm coming from with this?
Well, not entirely, because it's not a case where he refuses to ratify it. It's more than that. He says we annul it. We cassamus in Latin. We annul it, quash it, suppress. So I don't see this as a case simply of refusing to ratify.
Well, by refusing to ratify something, you do annul it. It's gone. It's done. It's dead in the water. It means the decision it means the decision is erased.
Yeah.
If the church refuses to annul a sacrament that someone has received, that sacrament was never received.
I'm having a little bit of trouble on the hearing on that last part.
What was the last sentence you heard me say?
About annulling a sacrament. Yeah, about annulling a sacrament. I'm having a little trouble hearing that part.
So if the church refuses to, you could say, ratify or recognize a so-called sacrament that someone receives, for example, if they were baptized using an incorrect formula, it's not simply that sacrament is is just simply valid but not recognized by one person. It's that sacrament never ever occurred. It's not a sacrament. So, for example, if someone was baptized in the name of the Father, the Mother, and the Holy Spirit, both Catholics and Orthodox would say that is not a real sacrament. We refuse to recognize that, which is what ratify means. We refuse to recognize that as a sacrament. Therefore, no sacrament ever occurred. It's that's how we would understand how Leo looks at the 28th canon of Chalcedon. That he just looked at and goes, it's a persona non grata, except it's a canon non grata, so to say.
Well, all I can tell you is what he said. It is what it is. He said what he said, but the original question was could I give examples of the Pope acting unilaterally without the Synod? And typically, in the regime at Illyricum, the popes will generally give all sorts of instructions about what should be done and not should be done. And having read the papal letters, I very rarely, if ever, hear them, referring to the authority of their synod. Usually their reference is the authority of Blessed Peter in some way. Also, by the way, I forgot, I should have said earlier in answer to you, the same is true even more so with the papal decretals. So on the earliest papal decretals, which we have from the late 4th century, from the time of either Damasus or at least Siricius and afterwards, the reference for the authority is almost always to St. Peter in some way, almost never to any kind of synod.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Do you recognize as valid those decretals that are commonly known as the pseudo-Isidore decretals?
No, but occasionally, I haven't made a deep study of those, but occasionally I will find in those decretals actually passages I recognize from real decretals, but as well as stuff that is apocryphal. So therefore, when I say no, I'm excluding those parts which do come out of real decretals. And I haven't made spent a lot of time studying that. Just something I noticed casually, in making the study of the false decretals. So the basic answer is no.
Yeah. Just as a quick note, the reason that you recognize those is because the false decretals are made up, probably 80-85% of them are just quotations taken from the Bible, various church fathers, various decretals, and they're sort of woven together. And then the other, 10 to 20% of material is pseudo-Isidore himself writing. So they string things together. That's why. So about Pope St. Leo, we would look at that and say that's Pope St. Leo acting within a synod, and that being the Synod of Chalcedon. So he's one of the bishops present. And so could he be acting with the Roman Synod? I suppose so, but that's irrelevant to the fact that he's acting within the Synod of Chalcedon.
Well, in some sense he is, that's true, but, by the time this information had reached him, the synod was probably long over. There was not email at those days, it wasn't something that would come to his knowledge instantly. It would take quite a while for those things to come back. And my recollection is that was after the synod that he gave that answer about Canon 28.
Yeah, it was let's see, it'd take about 2 to 3 weeks to get messages from Constantinople to Rome. Maybe as much as 4 weeks. So it was at least a couple of months from the time that it occurred until his word got back to Constantinople. But we know that his legates were there, and his legates annulled it in his name. So, he had a legate who was able to speak on behalf of him. And it should be noted that his legates, his main legate, actually uses the canon of Constantinople 1, stating that Constantinople had second place, he uses that as justification to ding Dioscorus of Alexandria on misseating Flavian. So that then begs the question of, did Leo even really have a right to annul the 28th canon? Because his legate certainly thought that the canon, which Canon 28 was based on, was valid.
Well, that is not the way I read the Acts of the Council. So, what I have found in the Acts of the Council, that one of the papal legates, Lucentius, was unhappy about this canon. So he says this: "It is clear that having set aside the constitutions of the 318, meaning Nicaea, they have followed those of the 150, meaning Constantinople 381, which are not included in the synodical canons, and which they say were decreed almost 80 years ago." And then he adds, "If therefore they," meaning bishops of Constantinople, "have exercised this privilege in these times, why do they seek it now? If they have never had it, why do they seek it?"
Mm-hmm. But what about what he said earlier?
About Pope Leo?
About that canon of Constantinople. I'm trying to find it here. Here it is. So this is from the translation done by Richard Price. Father Richard Price is a Catholic priest and patristic scholar. And this is the papal legate Pascasinus. Says, during the reading, the most devout Oriental bishops and those with them exclaimed, "Flavian went in as if already condemned. There's a blatant case of corruption, of corrupt prosecution. Why was Flavian not seated in his proper place? Why was the Bishop of Constantinople put in 5th place?" Pascasinus, the most devout bishop, said, "Look, in accordance with the will of God, we give first place to the Lord Anatolius. But they put the blessed Flavian 5th. Diogenes, the most devout bishop of the Church of Cyzicus, said, because you know the canons." So what it seems like is that the papal legates here are actually backtracking.
Okay, but
it seems like they were okay with it. I'm sorry, you first.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I insist. You first.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, I've heard that quotation. I actually heard that from Craig Trillia, the same argument. But my question to you is, it looks like you're talking about a different point in the council. So are you talking about something that happened at the beginning of the council or at the end?
At the beginning of the council. I'm actually trying to pull up the actual exact quotation. We have it in one of our videos here. But I'll get you the citation in just a moment. But it is towards the beginning. I believe it's in the first session.
Okay.
You continue on with what you were saying, and when it comes up, I'll tell you the exact citation.
Okay. Well, you've hit on an interesting point here. This is a very interesting point. And what I found in the Acts is that I have found that bishops of the East, including some very great ones, believed that Rome had approved of Canon 3. Or even, yes, Canon 3, maybe Canon 3, but Canon 28, even Canon 28. So an example I would give here would be Eusebius of Dorylaeum, who was, extremely Orthodox bishop, fantastically good bishop. But Eusebius actually said at one point they had read this canon to Pope Leo, and the Pope approved. And my recollection was he was talking about Canon 28. It would take me a little time to find the exact quote. But Eusebius was a fantastically good bishop. And yet what he says here is not historic. I mean, the only way I can account for this is that there must have been some kind of misunderstanding. I don't know how. But there is no way that Pope Leo would have approved of Canon 28. We know, in fact, that he disapproved it. But it would not surprise me, that there would be this kind of misunderstanding or different perspectives on the canons and different views about what Rome did or did not accept.
By the way, the citation for the quotation from Father Richard Price Acts is page 144 of Volume 1. The reason I give all of the citations is in English or in English works, and not in the typically don't cite the primary Latin, as I want the audience to be able to verify the citations that I give. Because plenty of times early on, people would say, "Oh, it's here in Nancy," or "It's here in Migne," or "It's here in whatever," and I would go look it up, and it's not what it would say. I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm just saying for the benefit of the audience, so they can read them themselves. I remember you had taken issue with me at one point in a video that you had been interviewed. You had said that I don't quote from Migne and Nancy, and that's precisely the reason. I want the audience to be able to verify what I'm saying. I want them to be able to see for themselves. And so I try to quote from sources that are easily available on the internet, not from sources that they would have to spend $80 or $90 on a book to access, or something that's in a language they don't understand.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Actually, I have the quote from Eusebius of Dorylaeum, so I may as well give that one here. On Canon 28?
Please.
Yeah. Okay. So Eusebius says, this is astounding to me, but he does say it. I have freely subscribed because I also read this rule to the most blessed Pope in the city of Rome in the presence of clergy of Constantinople, and he accepted it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I found that in the ACO. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you first. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, all I'm saying is that I didn't, find that in a translation. I found that in the ACO and using the original languages, but it still is, it is surprising, but I think, though, that I at least am willing to say here that there are different understandings of the canons as well as maybe misunderstandings, but certainly different perspectives that go back, long before the definitive schism between the East and West. And for my part, I just, had to accept that as a historical reality.
May I ask you a few questions about that?
Sure.
Okay, a few of them are just simple yes or no questions.
Sure.
Do you think that involved in this misunderstanding with the papal legate Pascasinus, with the papal legate Vicentius, with Eusebius of Dorylaeum, with Leo, and the whole statements that they have made, do you think that it's simply a misunderstanding, or do you think that maybe some people might be trying to backtrack, or maybe some people are simply lying? Or is it just purely a misunderstanding?
In this case of Eusebius, I think it's some kind of misunderstanding. I don't believe he's lying or backtracking.
Okay. What do you think he misunderstood about this? Because the canon is pretty clear.
Well, when he says, I also read this rule to he'd taken refuge in Rome after the Robber Council. When he says, I also read this rule to the most blessed Pope in the city of Rome in the presence of clergy of Constantinople, and he accepted it. That, to me, must be some kind of misunderstanding. That's the only way I can account for it.
Okay, but what was misunderstood about it? I mean, when you read the canon, it's like, assuming this is Canon 3 of Constantinople he's reading, should be, I don't know any other canon it could be.
Well,
what could possibly be misunderstood?
Okay, technically, it had to do with Canon 28, which is similar, but he's talking about Canon 28.
How was he able to read Canon 28 to Leo before Canon 28 had actually been put forward?
You know what? That is not said in the Acts. All I can tell you here is what I read in the sources. And
because
it
seems. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt again. There's a delay. Please continue.
Okay. It is a mystery because he's such a great bishop that I have to exclude about him, lying. He's not lying about anything. And I don't believe that Pope Leo approved this canon and then backtracked. I believe it is some kind of misunderstanding. When he says, I read this rule, you're right. Canon 28 did not exist, but it's likely that something of that sort was already, shall we say, in the makings. He's probably telling us that he read some kind of similar rule. Maybe he was thinking about Canon 3 and thought it was the same thing. I don't know, but that is what he says. He says, I read this rule to the Most Blessed Pope in the city of Rome in the presence of clergy of Constantinople, and he accepted it. This is at the end of the Acts of Chalcedon in the 16th session. So I don't know if that's included in some of these translations that have come out, but I did find that in the Latin and Greek version.
Well, Father Richard Price, and by the way, I'm delighted that you quoted from ACO. I think way too many people quote from Migne, which is, for the audience sake, that is not a critical edition. Migne would publish just about anything uncritically. There's a lot of, as you can testify, Mr. Collorafi, there's a lot of spelling mistakes, a lot of typos in Migne, and part of that had to do with there being a fire, and they had to reproduce the plates from which it was printed. But ACO is a critical edition, and so Father Richard Price does this translation from ACO, and it is included here. He translates absolutely everything, including a bunch of the letters after the council. Can I give you, if you don't mind, would I be able to give you my theory about why Eusebius says this and which canon he's referring to?
Sure, that's why we're here.
All right. From what I've read, the statements I've read concerning the letters and statements of various bishops and saints concerning Canon 3 of Constantinople 1 and the Canon 28 of Chalcedon, is that the bishops in the East, they essentially considered Canon 28 to be the same canon, just reworded. And so when he speaks of Canon 28, he considers it one and the same as the third canon of Constantinople. That's what I think is going on. That's the only way that I could rectify it, because Canon 28 did not exist until the 16th session. Now, Father Richard Price, he writes this great book called, he edits and he writes one of the articles in it. It's called Chalcedon in Context. A bunch of different experts put in articles. It's a great book if you get a chance to read it, for anyone who's listening. And in the Acts of Chalcedon, he states that he thinks the canons were just sort of added in later, that they weren't part of the council. But in this book, Chalcedon Context, he goes back on that and he goes, you know what, I actually rescind that statement, because I think that they were definitely handled within the council itself. Now, I state that not because of something that you brought up, but because I know that someone listening will try to bring that up. But about for example, Illyricum, about Pope St. Celestine, about things like Auctoritas and Potestas. What are some statements from Pope St. Boniface where he directly ties the power of the keys to ruling, as opposed to just simply something that could be taken as, rectifying or restoring the bond of charity?
Well,
now if you'd rather not discuss this, that's fine. If you think we've gone over it enough, that's fine. But I just thought perhaps you'd like more time to speak on that.
well, yeah. I mean, I can give what I consider to be example. Now we can. I guess people can have different interpretations about whether it's jurisdictional, but basically, let's take a letter to. Now, this one is from March of 422 to the vicar. So Pope St. Boniface says, the blessed Apostle Peter, in his stead, has entrusted everything to the Church of Thessalonica, that it may understand that the care for the many continues to rest upon it. Now, this is not just care. There's an actual regime in place. So the Pope tells them to resist violators of the canons and enemies of ecclesiastical law. The Pope also says a little bit later on, he sent, quote, letters full of threats and rebukes to the Thessalians. The Pope gives directions about a synod that's planned to consider the case of, that's the Bishop of Corinth, famous Perigenes. He gives directions. Bishops should not even be meeting without the knowledge of the vicar. And then he says, our judgment cannot be reconsidered, for it was never lawful to reconsider what was once established by the Apostolic See. Now, to me, these things are jurisdiction. As far as I'm concerned, those things are jurisdiction. I mean, he uses the word care, words like care, solicitude, but there's also jurisdiction as well.
Could you, just because it didn't come out clearly, could you tell the audience what the Latin word for care is?
Yeah, I mean, one word is cura, another word is solicitudo, words like that.
Okay, and in this case, he uses solicitudo, right?
You know what? I don't have the Latin immediately before me here. I do have translations I have made of it, but so I don't want to start quoting Latin I don't have in front of me. But
okay. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So thank you, by the way. So typically, when I've read the papal letters in Latin, the terms that they use are solicitudo, or in anglicized Latin, solicitudo. In ecclesiastical, I believe it's solicitudo, although I don't typically use ecclesiastical pronunciation. And it has nothing to do with me having an axe to grind with the Italians. It really has nothing to do with that. I prefer the classical pronunciation, but Italians are wonderful people. But they typically use that term, solicitudo, and it means like anxiety. It doesn't mean care, but it means almost like anxiety or worry. And I know that in his book, The Invention of Peter, Professor George Demokopoulos speaks about this extensively, about that term specifically. And I don't see how that word would be one of jurisdiction, because a grown parent still has a lot of anxiety for their children. They still have a lot of worry. They still have, they still care very much for them. And I know that the Latin cura has more to do with care, almost like a certain, like, tending to someone's needs. So I would be interested to see which term that he uses in that case. Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot in any way, shape, or form. And I'm more than willing to be corrected on this if it turns out that he said cura. But that was just something I wanted to mention.
Okay. Yeah, I offhand, I don't have what the exact original Latin is. Some people are better than I am. They can multitask and look it up somehow in the PL. I'm just a little more limited. I have the translations I've made from the Latin only in front of me.
If it makes you feel better, I'm equally limited. So you're in good company right now.
Okay. All right. In the case of, let's take, let's see. Okay, let's say a bishop, somebody named Parevius, who at Rome decided should be bishop for the Corinthians. So the Pope says here, and I believe it's in the same letter, or this one, well, we're going, yeah, it's right about the same letter, PL 2779, should be the same letter. He says, he objects that there's a synod planned to discuss the status of Perevius, whom the Apostolic See, after thorough examination of the matter, established as bishop for the Corinthians. So Rome has established somebody who's going to be bishop of Corinth. But there's a synod to discuss this matter. This is what Rome is objecting to. All right? So when you say care or cura, it's more than cura. Rome is asserting authority here, saying, look, you can't hold a synod. We've already decided this. That, to me, is not cura. That is a regime or a regimen. It's to me, it's authority. But again, I'll leave that. I'll let the audience, I'll let the listeners, form their own judgment.
So that's a good point you bring up. So this guy had been installed in Corinth. That was part of the Roman Patriarchate at that point. Up until the time of Iconoclast, and most of the Balkans was part of the Roman Patriarchate. And here we have a synod redeciding something. Now, wouldn't you say that the problem is that synod is redeciding something without that synod's head?
Well,
like a lesser synod is sort of trying to undermine a greater synod.
Well, that's certainly one part of the problem. But that's what the Pope is saying, though. His precise language is that they're discussing the status of Perevius, whom the Apostolic See, after thorough examination of the matter, established as bishop for the Corinthians. So it's not simply the Roman Synod. He could have said that. He could have said, look, they're having a lesser synod to reconsider what a greater synod has done. But that's not the language he uses in the letter. So what he says, exact words, that whom the Apostolic See, after thorough examination of the matter, established as bishop for the Corinthians. I'm not saying there wasn't a synod. I'm just saying that the authority he gives is that of the Apostolic See. He's not naming a synod one way or another. The objection is that a lesser synod is trying to reconsider what the Apostolic See has done here.
Okay, so, you're familiar enough with patristic writings to know that they will typically refer to the synod itself by the name of the head. We see this in the Council of Chalcedon, where they refer to the Egyptian synod simply as decisions of the Egyptian synod simply as the decision of the Dioscorus. We know that in the Sixth Ecumenical Council, we know as a matter of fact there was a synod that was held in Rome. It involved 120 bishops. But back and forth in the letters that are written and within the acts themselves, the bishops go back and forth, referring to the letter from that synod as the letter of Pope St. Agatho and the letter of that synod. And further, we know that the Apostolic See itself, there's quite a few assistant bishops within that see, and those would make up the heart of a Roman synod.
I'm not excluding that there can be a synod. Okay, but at the end of the day, I have to try to quote what the exact language is in the sources.
Of course.
Yeah. Even where there is a synod, even when you have a synod, sometimes the Pope will make decisions in the context of the synod that may be unilateral, individual. The likely example to me would be in the Lateran Council, where Pope Martin chooses a vicar and says, go ahead and establish hierarchies of bishops, priests, and deacons in the other patriarchates, where needed. I don't know that he went through the whole synod and they deliberated about who the bishop should be. The Pope, just as far as I can tell from the Acts, he pretty much decided it himself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so and that's very possible. The Pope has a right to choose a vicar, right? Just like a bishop has a right to choose his own representative to a synod that's going on, or a synod that will occur. Now, could I ask a favor real briefly? Would we be able to take an intermission for like 2-3 minutes?
Yeah, that would be fine. So, yeah, let's go ahead and take the intermission. But I just have one question about how much more debating you want to do, and how much time is left.
So I have a live Q&A at 3:00. So I'm fair to go for another hour if you're fine with it. I don't want to use up all your data, but I'm more than fine to continue going for about another hour. Well, if you want to wrap it up earlier, that's acceptable.
Okay. Well, just cover whatever you want to cover. Let's go ahead and take the intermission. Give me, let's say 5 minutes, and let's, go ahead and take it from there.
Okay, sounds good.
Great. Thanks, John. So where would you like to resume at?
There is one thing I want to bring up, which hasn't come up yet, from a couple of months ago. So on one of your posts, you brought up Saint Meletius of Antioch. And you made the statement that Rome was not in communion with him. My question to you is, do you still believe that?
Yes.
You do?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So it doesn't have any effect or change your mind as to did you see what I attempted to post on your site from a Roman synod of I think from 379 and what it said?
Yeah, I did see that.
You did?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Would you be able, for the benefit of the audience, to restate the argument?
I do want to do that, yeah. What I'd like to do, I want to make sure I have the exact quote here, which I can get, but because it's something I'm going to bring up because I've seen it brought up a lot. And basically, let me see here. Okay. So it's true that Rome for a long time did not recognize Saint Meletius of Antioch, and that Rome preferred Paulinus of Antioch, his rival. And recently, there were scholars that have put forward a fragment of a Roman council, which is found in Menia, and the fragment begins non nobis. And what it says is this. I'm going to quote here from PL 13-353. It says, "This is the end of this letter or exposition of the synod held at Rome under Pope Damasus and sent into the East, in which the entire Eastern Church in a synod held at Antioch believed with a like faith, and also consenting confirmed this faith with their signatures." And among the signatures it says, "I, Meletius, Bishop of Antioch, consent to everything written above, so believing and teaching, if anyone believes otherwise, let him be anathema." And there's multiple other signatures, almost 150, also from the PL.
Mm-hmm. So you take that to mean that Saint Meletius was in communion with Rome because he shared the same faith?
Well, you have to distinguish here. Does it mean that Rome recognized him as Bishop of Antioch? Not necessarily, but to say that he was not in communion, to say that Rome was not in communion with him, I just think is far too strong a statement to make. But I wanted it addressed because I see this I see this claimed over and over again. I see it claimed. I've seen it. People put it in comments. it's almost a meme, with a life of its own, that Saint Meletius of Antioch was not in communion with Rome, and he presided over the Second Ecumenical Council. So, yeah, I would object.
He certainly opened it. Yeah, he died before the council ended. It was Saint Gregory Nazianzus who completed the council. I believe he completed it. Okay, so in your mind, what is the difference between a schism and a heresy?
To me? You're asking me?
Yeah, in your mind, when you hear the word schism, how does that differ from the term heresy? If someone is in heresy versus if they're in schism?
Well, heresy is easy because in the Catholic Church, the basic definition is that's the denial or pertinacious doubt of something. Basically, something defined by the church. So it's something that is defined of divine faith, something that is in the positive revelation, defined by the church as such. Now, schism is interesting because I wish I'd had time to bring this up. Schism can mean either breaking your communion with Rome, as we understand it, or breaking communion with the rest of the church in some way. For example, we have, let's take, for example, the Donatists. We know that the Donatists did not break communion with Rome per se, but they broke their communion with the rest of the African church. And that's considered a schism, and we have the works of St. Apologist and St. Augustine and others against the Donatist schism. So anyway, that's the short answer. Go ahead.
Real quick, isn't it in the work of St. Altatus that he talks about how the Donatists are not in communion with Rome?
He does,
He talks about the one chair.
Correct. That's exactly.
So wouldn't that indicate that they are not in communion with Rome? That's how I understood it to be.
Okay, but what's the exact? Right, that is what he argues. I can get the exact. I actually would like to get the exact text here because I think it is important. I think I have it here.
Would we be able to handle after the talking about Saint Meletius?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead with about Saint Meletius. Sure.
Okay, so I don't want to get too sidetracked here. So in the case of schism, a person holds the same belief, but they're perhaps not in communion. An example of that would perhaps be old calendarist groups in the Orthodox Church where they hold the same dogmas, they're just simply not in communion. Or I believe the SSPX was out of communion, or was in schism from the General Catholic Church. They held the same beliefs theoretically, but we're not in communion. So St. Meletius saying that he holds the same beliefs as Rome doesn't really advance your point any further, because our whole point is he was in schism from Rome, and a schism indicates that you hold the same beliefs, you're just not in communion. And he was a rival bishop, and in Catholic canon law, a rival bishop and anyone who is ordained by a rival Catholic or by a rival bishop is automatically excommunicated, i.e., not in communion with Rome. So I'm not quite seeing your point. Do you follow what I mean? I mean, as far as I know, the Meletian schism was not quite handled until, I think it was the early 400s, when St. Meletius' successor, I think his name Flavian or Flavius, Flavian, when he rectified it with Rome.
That's true. He was given letters of communion from Rome at some point. Correct. But
Flavian,
I found it interesting. I found it interesting because I see it repeated over and over, but I don't believe it was a formal schism. Well, it may have been at one point, but basically, I don't believe he was in a formal schism from Rome. And if you go in the letters of pardon me?
How would you believe that it is not a formal schism?
Well, if we go into the letters of St. Basil, it is very clear that Rome had been told that St. Meletius was an Arian, or at least highly suspect. And Alexandria considered him to be an Arian. And there's a point where St. Meletius sends a deacon named Dorotheus to defend his orthodoxy before Pope Damasus. And they have some kind of a, shall we say, discussion, argument, debate before Pope Damasus, and Peter of Alexandria, or his legates, are accusing Meletius of being an Arian. Dorotheus defends the orthodoxy of Meletius and comes back. And in one of his letters, he brings back some instructions from Rome and basically a fragment of a Roman council saying, this is our faith. Whoever shares it is in communion with us. And there were some oral instructions to be given privately. And my belief is that it is likely that Rome was already in the process of reconciling with St. Meletius. Now, I don't know how I can prove that to everybody's satisfaction. I just think if you go through the letters of St. Basil, you will find the information I'm giving them.
Right, but St. Basil, because I've read his letters. By the way, anyone who's listening, you should really read the letters of St. Basil. They're absolutely fantastic. I've read his letters regarding it and how the three Cappadocians were in communion with St. Meletius. And they were also in communion with Rome and Alexandria, but Rome and Alexandria were not, as far as the general scholarship says, not in communion with St. Meletius. Mr. Collorafi, you are, of course, arguing that Rome was in some form of communion with St. Meletius. I would argue against that. But I've read the letters, and St. Basil bemoans the fact that Meletius is not accepted by Rome, that they continue to back Paulinus as the true bishop of Antioch. I don't see how someone could be an episcopal pretender and yet still be in communion with Rome, considering that that's an excommunicatable offense. Or I'm not sure, does it receive a latae sententiae excommunication if you are an episcopal pretender or a clerical pretender? I'm not sure.
In modern canon law, meaning the code of I get 1917 code of canon law, since around the 50s anyway. At some point there is. You're right. There is in Catholic canon law there is this this automatic excommunication for these basically unauthorized episcopal consecrations without a mandate. That's really the technical term. So, right, you're right. But we have to I would look at, the canon law that was in place at that time in the 4th century and the total context of things, and basically what Rome said is, this is our faith and whoever shares it is in communion with us. And clearly Meletius was willing to go to great lengths to show that he did in fact share that faith. And there's also letter 16 of St. Jerome to Damasus, where he says, Meletius, Paulinus, and Vitalis, the Apollinarian, say that they adhere to you. So they say that they adhere to you, meaning Damasus. And then Jerome, being a bit on the cynical side, says either one is lying or all three. But I think that was, clearly overly harsh on the part of St. Jerome. I think Meletius made sufficient efforts to prove himself and establish that he had the same faith as Rome. Now, whether that meant that Rome, recognized him as the undisputed bishop of Antioch is another issue. That's a canonical issue to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in other words, what you're saying is sharing the same faith means that you are in communion with someone.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that the case of Antioch was unusual. It was a special case. It was a kind of material schism, and it should not have happened. But, what I'm saying is that once Meletius took the proper steps to prove that he had the same faith and then to resolve the question of the episcopal schism. So there are people there, it's possible that, well, in fact, it's likely that the two sides negotiated and said, if one of us dies, the other should remain in possession of the episcopate. There was this kind of back and forth, and there was a lot of bitterness. But I don't believe that he was in a formal schism from Rome.
May I interject for a moment?
Sure.
So most of the audience listening are Eastern Orthodox, and they may not be familiar with the terms formal and material. Would you be able to explain the difference between, say, a formal schismatic versus a material schismatic for their benefit?
Oh gosh. Okay, that's a tough one. But it's very common. The formal material distinction is very common in Catholic theology, usually with heretics. So we say like a formal heretic is basically someone who has done what he's done deliberately. Whereas material, if let's say back in the day in catechism class, or somebody said how many sacraments there are, and I said 2 instead of 7, that would have been material heresy. In other words, it would have been objectively heresy, but nobody thinks I had the intention, so therefore it's not the true canonical delict. And so we make a similar point about schism, is that you have the outward elements of a schism without the intention to be in a schism. And St. Meletius took the steps to make sure, as far as he could, that this material schism would be healed.
In other words, a material heretic or a material schismatic, they don't realize that they're holding heresy, or they don't realize that they're in schism, versus a formal heretic or a formal schismatic. They realize that they're in schism. They realize that they are holding heresy. They've been informed, they've been told, and they refuse to renounce it. So in that case, are you saying that St. Meletius didn't realize that he was in schism?
Well, I'm saying there was a material schism in the sense that, well, first of all, there was the schism between the parties at Antioch itself, and then there was the division at Rome. So he took the steps, in my opinion, he took every step that he could to heal both of those divisions, as far as is in his power. And the fragment from the PL, in the fragment from the PL, he even is signing as Bishop of Antioch, and there's almost 150 bishops with him, and that is taken from the PL out of the Roman archives. So it's my belief, I don't know if I'm going to prove this to everybody today, but I'm saying there are at least serious steps taken to heal that division, and I think it's very likely that Rome, shall we say, Rome, I believe, was reconciled with Meletius at some point.
Okay, so 150 bishops with him, that's a lot. He was tremendously popular in what was soon to become the Patriarchate of Constantinople and the Patriarchate of Antioch. He was tremendously popular. So if I'm surprised at anything, it's that there were only 150 bishops with him. But you had said earlier that he did everything in his power to heal the rift. But I mean, if he had done everything in his power, and if I'm misquoting you, please let me know, but if he had done everything in his power to avoid schism, wouldn't he have stepped down in favor of the candidate which Rome backed?
I think, what he would have been willing to do, I don't know. But the issue with him was that he was accused of being a heretic, and that was the issue that he addressed through Dorotheus at Rome. I don't know what else was said in there about that. But there may be some historical sources. If you read books about it, they're going to say the sides tried to, some people believe that there was an arrangement, not for him to step down necessarily, but for one side, after the death of the bishop, to give the episcopate to the other side. In other words, not try to elect a successor and keep the see divided. I believe there was that kind of effort to resolve the schism. I don't want to get into it. We're really getting deep into the weeds here, but
No, this is good. This is fine. I like it.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. I mean, I think he would have been willing. I mean, you'll find among the historians that'll talk about it, say, let's for example, he would have said, he would have been willing to say, let's have the Gospels take the place of the episcopal thrones. There's that kind of healing. In other words, one of us dies, let the other, go ahead and tend the flock. I believe that there were that kind of negotiations. And as I said, when Dorotheus returned from Rome, he had some private, he had some instructions that were to be given orally about canonical matters. We don't know what they were. If you want, I don't have the exact epistle number of St. Basil. I can get it at some point in for you. But there were some instructions to be given orally that are not recorded in the epistles of St. Basil. And I think it's unlikely that Rome would be giving those kinds of instructions if Dorotheus and his Bishop Meletius were just regarded as being completely, out of communion and miscreants. So I think it was likely that Rome was moving to reconcile with Meletius even at that point.
Okay. So this is your opinion, sort of your suspicion, so to say, not necessarily something that you can prove with actual statements like letters of communion.
I'm not saying there were letters of communion, no.
Okay. All right, great. Now, there were a few other, because I remember you made, or someone who you were associated with for a while, made several videos critiquing points we had made. Or do you have other points from those that you would like to bring up?
Well, let me summarize it just briefly. So you're okay on the Lateran Council.
Mm-hmm.
The critiques basically that I made were on Pope Vitalian. I thought you took an extreme position. I thought it was unsupported or insufficiently supported by historical sources, very few primary sources. The Sixth Ecumenical Council, or rather, I should say, the Patriarch of Constantinople at the Sixth Ecumenical Council announced the restoration to the diptychs of Pope Vitalian of Holy Memory. So I found your whole position there to be extreme. Now, on the Lateran Council, there were a number.
Just real quick, if I may interject, if we can handle that before moving to the next topic, would that be acceptable?
Go right ahead. Yeah, take whatever time needed.
Because the person who created these videos has since taken them down, they were an associate of yours. Would you be willing to tell the audience what you understood my position to be on Pope St. Vitalian?
Well, it was your blog post, and you were the way I read it was that you were making a kind of argument that he was a heretic or a monothelite, but without necessarily being definitive about it. But I took it as you were suggesting that he may have been a monothelite at some point.
Okay, so the blog post is up, and you can actually look on the blog. We have not edited that blog post, so it's not like we changed anything from the time that video first aired a few months ago, I think. And the point was not that St. Vitalian was a monothelite. That was actually the title. The point was that he entered into communion with the monothelites. And that he then broke communion with them and took a very hard line against them in the second half of his pontificate.
Right.
That was our point.
Right. Well, do you have any historical sources that directly say that he had a hand or was involved or complicit in the death of St. Maximus?
Yeah, the statements from the bishops, I believe it's in the letter, it's in the article itself. It cites the letter where the Byzantine authorities go, look, here's the deal. The Patriarch of Constantinople, the Pope, the Emperor, they've decided anyone who does not accept this agreement must die. Now, your objection was that you can't trust what heretics say. I wouldn't say you can't trust what they say, but the likelihood that they're lying is definitely higher. What we do know is that Pope St. Vitalian entered into communion with Peter of Constantinople. And we don't have the letter that Vitalian wrote to Peter of Constantinople, but the letter that Peter of Constantinople wrote to Vitalian immediately after which Vitalian went to communion with Peter. And in it, Peter is saying, how great it is that we're in communion now, this and that. We share we share a certain, what's the word I'm looking for? He says we share a certain spiritual oneness or something like that. That letter that Peter of Constantinople wrote was the sole piece of evidence against Peter of Constantinople at the Third Council of Constantinople, that being the Sixth Ecumenical Council. That alone got Peter of Constantinople condemned as a heretic. Yet for Vitalian, it was good enough for him to go into communion with the guy. We also know that Vitalian gave communion to the emperor, who was an avowed monothelite in the first part of his reign. So most of the stuff is detailed in Economu's book. It's called Byzantine Rome and the Greek Popes. He goes into a pretty heavy amount of detail about it and cites the PL and the PG and other documents.
Well, let me ask you this. Assuming that it's true, okay, let's say it's completely correct that he entered in communion with men who were found to be monothelites. Why was he not condemned at the Sixth Ecumenical Council, which is called to deal with this situation? And why did the council, instead of condemning him, do well? At least as far as Constantinople is concerned, say restoring to the diptychs Pope Vitalian of holy memory. Why did not the opposite of that happen?
Because he repented. He took a strong line in the second half of his episcopate. He took a very strong line against monothelitism, and it coincided with the death of the emperor at the time. Earlier I had said the emperor in the second part of his reign, he had taken a very strong position against monothelitism. I should not have said that. The emperor, I believe it was Constance, was very much a pro-monothelite, and then I believe when he died, my memory's a little bit foggy on this, I believe when he died and a new emperor was elected, that's when Vitalian, he's a saint by the way, St. Vitalian changed course. And he then takes this anti-monothelite stance. So that's why he was not condemned, because he didn't, it's not how you run the race, it's how you finish it. And he finished the race as an Orthodox bishop.
Okay. Well, I found, let's just say I found the title of the article. What was it was called? Was Pope Vitalian a monothelite? I don't know.
It was, well, I mean, to get people to read these articles, you have to do a little bit of clickbait, you know what I mean? And you have to have something that's fairly short. And so I put the question in, was Pope Vitalian a monothelite?
Well, what's your own
answer? The answer to it was that he went into communion with the monothelites, and that later on that he repented of it.
I see. Okay, well, let's just say I found the title of the article to be highly tendentious.
Yeah, that was, well, I mean, that was the point, is for it to be very, clickbaity.
Okay. Well, can we move on to the Lateran Council?
Please.
Okay. Now, did you? I mean, I did a critique of you. It's been taken down. Do you still want to respond to that? Because if you do, I think you should have the time to respond to what I said. Do you want to?
Well, truth be told, I don't, and that was a pun, by the way. Truth be told, I don't recall exactly what was said in that video. I listened to it right when it came out. I think it probably came out 4 months ago, 3 months or something like that. My memory isn't very good for things I hear. I'm much more of a visual memorizer. Would you be able to provide the critiques of what I had said for the audience?
Well, yeah, very briefly. It's almost a moot point now, so it's no longer on the internet. But basically, you still have the post up on the Lateran Council. There's a number of critiques that I made. The lack of primary sources was one, but on a more substantive, the thing that bothered me is actually I found you distancing yourselves from various saints, in my opinion. For example, small things and then greater ones. The small thing would be the way Pope Martin handled the appeals. You talked about him being desperate for appeals or a shortage of appeals, whereas the primary sources talk about appeals are just coming in from all over the place. That was one critique. And then this thing you quoted from, what's his name? That fellow, it was a Demacopoulos. I forget which one. I think it was Demacopoulos. You quoted him as talking about the popes leveraging the relics of St. Peter to stay relevant. And I quoted what actual real hagiographers had to say about Pope Martin. So my question to you is, do you have any 7th century Orthodox sources that affirm what you quote Economou, or what's his name, Demacopoulos is saying about the popes leveraging the relics of St. Peter to stay relevant?
Okay, so one, there's in the article on Lateran 649, there's plenty of primary sources quoted. We quoted the Council of Lateran 649. In fact, that makes up a tremendous portion of the words in it. I had to read the entirety of the Acts of Lateran 649, translated also by Father Richard Price, to do so. So I don't think that's a fair critique, but that's your critique of it. As for, do I have any church fathers stating that the popes leveraged the relics of St. Peter? No, I don't. And the reason is that that's investigative work versus actual statements. That's following a trend. So this is not something that I'm saying comes from the church fathers or something that I'm saying was a church teaching. It's an observation of a historian of what was going on.
Well, let me put it this way. I asked you the question, so you answered it. I mean, I'll let people judge for themselves what they think, but that was something I wanted to hear. That are there 7th century actual Orthodox saints or fathers or anybody like that who is talking this way? So I guess I'll just let your answer stand as it is. It's something I'd wanted to ask. Okay.
Now, you had other critiques about Lateran 649, and I recall there were several more, but I don't recall what they were. Do you have any more that you'd like to share about it?
Well, there were more. Yeah, it was more substantive. So one of them was this dispute about the keys. So you had said it. I believe you said something about it was the power to forgive sins or something to that effect. I don't remember the exact words any longer. But I made the point, among other things, that Stephen of Dora makes mention of those keys basically in the context of asking the Pope to intervene, to use authority. And I brought up what happened at the Council of Ephesus, which the legate Philip, who invoked the keys right before the condemnation of Nestorius, and he's acting somewhat together with St. Cyril of Alexandria. So, I did find objectionable if you're saying that the power of the keys is in Roman Catholic theology only only for the forgiveness of sin, like going to confession, your parish priest. My point is that they are invoked at times for the most solemn jurisdictional acts.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, my understanding of it from reading the Catholic Encyclopedia and reading patristic texts is that the power of the keys up until the time of the scholastics was, if not entirely, almost entirely a matter of forgiving sins. You did bring up a quotation from Pope St. Celestine that sounded like it could lend itself to an understanding of a sort of solicitude or care in the sense of solicitude. That's my understanding of it.
Okay, rather than belabor that, I'll just make the final thing I had to say was when you compared it, what Pope Martin did, you said it was basically no different from Orthodox. I think you said Orthodox, the creation of Orthodox hierarchies. What was it in Roman Catholic or Protestant countries? And then my question, my question to you is, when did that happen? When did any Orthodox patriarch say we're going to name a patriarchal vicar by the authority of St. Peter, Prince of the Apostles, with the power to name bishops, priests, and deacons in other patriarchates, and then we're requiring obedience to that vicar? So go ahead and, feel free.
So in that case, what you're asking, I mean, it comes down to at what point did any of them say they are, okay, so there's 2 points that are being made. At what point did a patriarchate install patriarchal vicars in an area that they believe to be heretical or at least in schism? The answer is all over the world, all of the time. The second part of that is, when do they do it in the name of St. Peter? The answer is, I'm not aware of any time of them saying they were doing it in the name of St. Peter, but I also do not think that that is relevant whatsoever, because actions speak louder than words. They're installing people, and they're doing so with authority. So whether they're doing it in the name of St. Peter or in the name of their synod is irrelevant to whether or not they're installing these people in areas that they consider heretical.
Well, let me just, if I can, one final question.
Sure.
Okay. I think it's about the last question from my point of view. So, I don't doubt that they do that. Let's take America as an example. So I don't know who set up the different Orthodox hierarchies in America, but did they say, did the Greeks set up a hierarchy that's mainly for the Greeks, or do they say everybody has to obey this hierarchy? Greeks, Serbians, I don't know, Russians, Slavs, whoever. I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, I think pretty much they're going to set up a hierarchy mainly going by the ethnic group.
So in the beginning of, maybe it was the late 1800s, I'm actually making a video related to this that will come out in probably the fall. The Russians had a whole hierarchy going in which they had Greek, Arab, Serbian, Romanian bishops under it. And it fell apart when the communists took over and there was no longer funding coming from the Tsar. Second, the Greeks set up a hierarchy to take care of Greeks, but anyone who decides to become an Orthodox Christian is ultimately responsible to the local hierarchs. Now, in the case of overlapping jurisdictions, we do have what's called SCOBA, the Standing Conference of Orthodox Bishops, or standing conference of I can't remember what it is, or even how it's spelled, but SCOBA is the name. So, you are responsible to these informal synods of bishops, and these bishops do communicate with each other. I mean, it's not like a person can really, poop the bed with one bishop and then just, jump over to another one. It's like, oh, no one knows who I am now. It's like, no, they communicate and they have deals and they will release clerics to other synods regularly. Now, as far as the Antiochians go, the Antiochians and the OCA and the ROCOR have, I would assume, taken in the lion's share of converts. So all of the jurisdictions are for anyone in the area. I mean, we're not saying to people, you can receive valid sacraments at any church, that whether Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox, as you like. We're not saying that. We're telling everyone, you need to, I think the meme is you need to become Orthodox. So we're there, ready whenever people are ready.
I see. Okay, well, listen, I want to thank you for having had me on here on your channel, on your program. I don't really have any. If you have any final questions of me, I'll try to answer it. Otherwise, I'm about ready to go to a closing statement if I can.
Yeah, I think that probably now is an appropriate time
just have
for us to do that, unless Ubi does.
Sure.
Yeah, I first off, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on. It's been a real pleasure. I've tremendously enjoyed our discussion / debate, and you're more than welcome to come on anytime. It's been tremendous. For you, I have a question.
Sure.
You're a translator of Latin and French, right?
Yes.
And how did you stumble into that?
Okay. All right. Just off the record, you know what? I may as well tell you. I mean, I was raised today, although I have a Greek.
If you'd rather not answer.
No, it's okay. It's fine. I have a Greek grandfather.
If you'd rather not answer, it's perfectly fine.
No, it's okay.
Uh-huh.
So I was raised, even though my grandfather had a Greek name, Kalliuros, I was pretty much raised on the Latin Mass in the late 60s, which was kind of like going up the down staircase, because after Vatican II, the Mass was pretty much thrown out. So I had a background in Latin, and when I went to school, they taught foreign languages, so they taught French. And because of the Latin, I thought, well, it's, I'm sure you know, the Mass, the breviary, those things are pretty much vulgar Latin, as it's called. It's not classical Latin. It's fairly easy to understand. You can understand a lot of it without understanding all of the declensions, although you have to study those. So I was able to understand a lot of it, and consequently able to understand French and just make progress with languages. Later on, I learned Greek, and well, I'm not going to go into who my professor is, but you might. He's I won't go into that, but not today. But anyhow, it just one thing led to another in that way, and I wound up just studying languages, and I liked it quite a lot. So anyway, so there you have it.
Yeah, I also tremendously love languages. I use about 4 or 5 of them in any given day, Latin being one of them, and of course English, but there's a few others. I don't want to say what they are, as it might give away who I am. One of them is a very rare language. But yeah, that's fantastic. And you are, correct me if I'm wrong, you are a sedevacantist. Am I right?
You know what? People ask me that, and I've told them, kind of an off-the-cuff answer that I don't think Francis is Catholic, but it's not like this whole chain of syllogisms and canonical conclusions that the sedevacantists do. So I don't identify as a sedevacantist, but I have friends that are sedevacantists, true. So I may agree with them up to a point, but I don't know if I want to identify that way.
I gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Right on. I just wanted to kind of understand where you were coming from, and then the question about languages, I just want to know for my own personal interest, because I'm very much interested in languages, and it's incredible how you end up with just sort of stumbling into translation projects that you've never planned on being involved in. But yeah. Anyway, well, I actually do not have a closing statement whatsoever.
Okay.
If you want to give one, you're more than welcome to give one.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, since you're not taking one, all I'm going to say to you then is I'll forego the closing statement, except to say that I want to thank you for having me on. Thank you for the civility, cordiality, and the erudition in this debate. And I want to thank you for having to be on your channel. And for those who are out there, if you are, as I said, a seeker of truth in some way, you're not sure, maybe you're a Protestant and you realize that sola scriptura is wrong, or you're trying to discern, or just if you're an intelligent critic, if you leave a theological comment on comments, I will try to answer those. I will try to find a way to answer those. And so maybe you can even become a kind of quasi-participant in this debate. We will see. So thank you very much once again.
Appreciate it, John. Thanks so much for coming on
All
with
right,
us.
thank you so much, John. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, and it's been a pleasure. And whenever you'd like to come on, anytime, you're more than welcome.
Okay, thank you for that.
All right, take
Thank
care.
you. Have a great
blessed
weekend. I
weekend.
hope you're able to make it to Mass this weekend.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care.
All right, see you. Bye-bye.
Bye.